Okay, so we're live here and we're live here. So let's see if I can straighten this out, try to fix the lighting. Give it a minute here. So, welcome in, everybody. Hope all is well. Um, Took a break from a couple of these videos on YouTube, but I wanted to do something a little bit different today and really kind of go through kind of what the process is kind of when someone new comes in or kind of what you're looking for, what kind of how you get to a complaint or health challenge and what the thought process is, at least for me, when I'm going to work with someone, sort of like, is there a priority? Now, of course, with this, as always, there's always a bit of flexibility with this, depending on how a person comes in, how they present. Things do change a little bit. Things, what takes priority in terms of order is always going to change to some degree. Sometimes you're doing multiple things at the same time, so that kind of changes too. But as a general rule, I've noticed there's like a lot of different approaches, especially in the alternative space, and throwing a lot of different things at different problems might be useful, but then you don't really get to the root, and that's really kind of what it's about at the end of the day. It's about getting to the root of what's going on, addressing it, and then fixing it. So that is kind of the goal of this video. It's not going to be super long, but I just kind of want to go over kind of what that workflow is, kind of how I look at it, and maybe that might be helpful in your own life too. So how it starts for me is there is a triad or a triangle of health. And generally, any sort of health challenge is going to come from one of three legs of that triangle. You're going to have a structural issue, which is, it could be spinal, musculoskeletal. You're going to have a chemical or nutritional side, which is all of your nutrition, biochemistry. You can even argue that things like conventional medicine, homeopathy, diet, nutrition, toxin overload, allergies are all going to kind of fall into this sort of side of the triangle. Whereas in that structural side, you have more of your, what you would consider traditional chiropractic, osteopathy, muscle techniques, acupuncture, reflexes, reflexology. That's all kind of the structural component. And then you have the third side, which is mental or emotional, or mental emotional, depending on where you look. That's going to be, stress management, your psyche, how that kind of builds up, electromagnetic health, homeopathy, energy medicines, crystals, kind of all those types of things kind of fall into that emotional side. So different types of stress reduction techniques. But as you note, like the triangle has obviously three legs, and they all have interplay with each other. So they're not necessarily separate. They all kind of feed into each other in a different way. And it's really our goal as practitioners to kind of find and refine that process with people. And everyone comes in a little different of a level, a little different of, kind of where they're at on that triad, on that triangle. Some things might be more structural, but maybe you're feeling that, low back pain because someone is a pain in your butt. So, and then getting to the root of that, finding out what is that, trigger. Is it, a past life experience? Is it something that's going on currently? Is that sort of what's, allowing that pain to manifest? Or maybe it's coming from, a potential bladder infection, or maybe a slower colon, or maybe your liver and kidneys are backed up. You see that a lot, those detox pathways. We're going to get into that. So before even getting into a problem, or getting into kind of why someone might come in, looking at those three factors: structural, nutritional, stress, emotional, mental side. All three, they kind of are equal, and you kind of have to base kind of where you are with someone, where they fall kind of on that. So before even going into, an initial consult or anything like that, that is kind of where we're starting. From there, particularly in the functional medicine type space, this is where I see like a lot of confusion comes in. because even in a lot of the posts that I do here on Instagram and TikTok and other places, is it's like, oh, you can use this herb for this. Well, that's nice. It can help. But again, how are we getting to the root cause? How are we addressing the root? So for me, there's kind of a priority system. Now, again, depending on what's going on, things can sort of flow and mold and switch around depending on what's going on. But there is a general flow that works for most people. And that is a priority list. In other words, like you kind of have to tackle these steps one after another in a specific order if you're looking to get optimal results most of the time. So what I find is step one, there's really kind of it's a three-pronged approach here too. It's optimizing nervous system function, optimizing endocrine system function, and opening up drainage pathways. So all three. So the nervous system does fall into all three sides of that triangle we talked about. There's definitely a mental emotional component to it that definitely comes in with the endocrine system too, because the endocrine system is your hormones. So, when you're thinking about that, this is where things like blood sugar regulation and stress, adrenal cortisol function, that's going to all come from, the hypothalamus all the way that down up there and cascade downward, right? So, and that is really kind of the interface between the endocrine system, our hormones, and the nervous system, which is that more kind of reactionary system. So, before even getting into if there's infections, and there's a bunch of different theories as to what infections are and why, and that whole bit, the tricky part before that is we have to make sure we can optimize those three things first: the nervous system, the endocrine system, and drainage pathways. Now, the first two we kind of went over. There's a lot of interplay between them. What really comes up, what I see, is that's where a lot of the lifestyle stuff really comes into play, because with that, the nervous system, again, chiropractic, acupuncture, any sort of stress management that you enjoy doing. Now, if there are certain nutritional imbalances, they could lead to different disruptions in the nervous system, and obviously they can have trickle down effects in the endocrine system too. With different hormones, whether you're hungry, blood sugar, etc. So, but to balance the endocrine system, there's generally four different things that are the primary factors that you have to address in no particular order. So one is stress, again, that emotional mental component. So not to say that we can eliminate stresses completely, because that's just simply not going to be the case, but do we have appropriate mechanisms to handle them, to manage them, or do we have optimal stress relieving techniques available to us? Now, they don't have to be, anything crazy. Some people like going to the gym as a stress reliever. Some people like doing art or playing an instrument, or maybe just going for a walk, or maybe doing a meditation. There is no right answer. It's just a question that do we have some sort of mechanism that can handle that? The next one is sleep. So there's really no way around this. Like sleep and stress are just two huge ones. And the reason why everyone talks about it is because it's so important. And there's so many, again, downstream effects from this. Now, if we're not getting optimal sleep, if we're not living in line, getting sun first thing in the mornings to get our circadian rhythm going and on track in the right way, we're going to mess up melatonin production, which only happens in complete darkness, which is why if we're on screens, particularly late at night, they can cause issues, especially when it comes to sleep, but more importantly, how you feel the next morning. Melatonin is also one of the most powerful antioxidants we have in our body, and its production is only triggered in darkness. So if we're not in a dark environment, we're not getting optimal melatonin production. The other side of that is obviously trying to live in line with the sun. Are we getting exposure in the morning, especially in our eyes in the morning, and in the evening at night as the sun's going down, and obviously in between in the middle of the day? Can we do that too? So sleep hygiene is really important. There's plenty of different things you can do to optimize that. Room temperature is a big thing. So I like it around like 68 degrees, but somewhere in that like usually high 60s range is ideal for most people. We talked about light a little bit. That's a big thing, particularly blue lights at night. That's a huge thing. So that's one thing that you have to make sure that we're limiting as best as we possibly can. And where you go from there is going to be different. So I like having blackout shades if you could get them to create that environment. Moving out of a city a few months ago, late last year, has definitely had a positive impact on my sleep, no doubt whatsoever. If you could sleep without your phone around or on airplane mode, that is generally big, because there are some, when you're having electromagnetic disturbances, whether it's from 5G or something else, like having that closed it does seem to impact your sleep in some way. So I keep my phone on airplane mode. There's a ton of things you can do. The other two that are really big, and some part of this is going to go into kidney health, but it's salt and sugar. So salt gets demonized a ton, especially in today's world. The problem is most salt actually comes from prepared food, prepackaged foods, and eating out at restaurants. It doesn't come from at home. And of course, if you're eating out, generally you can take it to the bank that salt is not going to be of high quality. Maybe it's iodized table salt or something else that has been super processed. And it's generally in high amounts. Now, we know that the more hyper palatable you can make food, the more it's going to sell, the more you're going to want. That's why, a lot of chips, snacks, etc., are literally made in labs so that you keep coming back for more. Like, that is a actual thing that happens. And then sugar is probably the biggest one, I'd say, along with sleep, because balancing blood sugar, particularly throughout the day, is going to have so many different downstream effects throughout the endocrine system: hunger, sleep, and stress. It actually is going to affect all of them in different ways. So making sure that we're optimizing that is going to be absolutely key. Then we get to drainage pathways. So that's the third kind of step. So those two are definitely the ones that are going to take a lot of work. The drainage stuff is a little bit more, you kind of have to get a little bit more kind of into the nitty gritty and kind of what's going around, but you could basically break it down fairly simply. So with that, what I look for with people is, are they going number two at least once a day, ideally twice, 2 to 3 times? Are you breaking a sweat? Again, ideally, if we could do it every day, but if not, at least 4 to 5 days a week. Are you going to the bathroom throughout that too? So are we getting enough water intake? And then breathing. Breathing is a huge thing. Most detoxification actually happens through the breath. I think it's around like 70%. It's just something we're doing all the time, every day. Working with people on breath work, as you actually improve their intake, or sorry, their breathing efficiency, you can actually get a detox reaction. I've actually seen it happen. Um, it's some people kind of get freaked out. It's like, oh, I feel like kind of wonky these last few days. You can actually have a detoxification reaction as you improve lung capacity. It's pretty wild. It does happen. And those are really kind of the four things that I look for. Those are essentially the benchmarks we get to before you can kind of go to those next steps. Because if we're not hitting those four things, if those aren't, in relatively good shape, you're going to have a lot of trouble detoxing. You can lead to something known as a Herx reaction, which is essentially you have a die-off reaction of any sort of imbalances downstream, and you don't feel great at the end of it. It is not fun. So where do we go from there? It's basically more than, at that point, about where are you getting backed up and why. Now, usually there's a few different places that happen. There's different organs. So things I look usually for: the liver and kidneys. Are those drainage pathways working properly? Is the liver able to handle whatever the toxic load is? That also goes with the gallbladder, the liver gallbladder complex. Kidneys are the main filter, obviously, for liquids. Similar process. Is that getting supported? Are you drinking enough clean water? That's going to be key. The colon is obviously a big one. We talked about that. Ideally, going to the bathroom at least once a day. If not, that is a big one we kind of have to get done. And then it's going to be lymphatic system support, mitochondrial support, energy. All of these things are going to kind of come together and all play a role. It's really, once all of these things are sort of taken care of, and we know that they're functioning properly, and this can happen through blood work or stool analyses or urinalyses, then we kind of take a step back and kind of go through, where are we going to fix kind of what's going on. So once we get through, all those drainage pathways are open, once we make sure the endocrine system's functioning, once we make sure that nervous system is doing its thing, we got to get our energy balanced and make sure those drainage pathways are all flowing. After that, then it goes down to kind of immune support. So at that point, once we know all of these things are working, then we could address things like potential parasites. Now, a lot of things that I see with parasites sometimes too, a lot of them are just imbalances of other kinds. Now, we all have parasites, we all have viruses, we all have bacteria inside of us at any given time. It's really more about a balance than eradicating something, even when it comes to parasites. A lot of times with parasites, it's actually usually just a fungal or yeast overgrowth too. Candida is usually a big one. And again, that's going to go back to, in some ways, actually goes back to finding that blood sugar balance. So candida is a big thing when blood sugar imbalances are an issue too. Once we get to that point, then we address things like mold and heavy metals. These are things like if we're sort of doing that underlying, we're taking care of all that underlying stuff and we're not getting any improvement, or if we've kind of stagnated, then it's time to look at heavy metal toxicity, which is going to be a few things. One, it could be amalgam fillings. That's a huge thing. That's a big, big, big issue. Is there some, potentially other sorts of different types of metals inside going on? Is there mold in the house or wherever you live? Chances are, if there's water damage, there's probably mold. That's something that you probably have to get done or have someone check your house to do. But a lot of us live in older houses. That's sometimes an underlying thing that is going to persist unless it's kind of addressed, because sometimes that can be the root too. But heavy metals are a huge one. As I mentioned, mercury is a big one, but we have things like glyphosate and lead and cadmium and arsenic, things that are coming in kind of through the food supply and different things, whether they're different medications potentially. Again, not obviously saying that you shouldn't take them, but you should be aware of what's potentially in them. Sometimes they are aluminum adjuvants or some of these other kind of metals that could be playing a role. This is definitely becomes an issue too when you're talking more in the neurological space too, because heavy metals, especially things like mercury, love nervous system tissue. So again, this is where some of that you kind of figure this stuff out through history and kind of go from there. And then from there, it's really just kind of addressing other imbalances. So, is there, a homeostasis? Is there any sort of dysbiosis going on? Addressing it accordingly. Is there something else going on in the digestive tract that probably needs to be addressed? If the answer is yes, you go do it. And that's more or less kind of like the flow. Again, there is always some, different approaches and different things you can do, but that's kind of the general format. Again, obviously, not everyone gets that same format in the same way, and everyone's a little different and has their own different, stories and presenting, symptoms and what's most important at a specific time. And it's just a question of just trying to put that together and make a plan that makes the most sense. So I hope this was helpful. I'm going to stop this live here on YouTube. I will answer a couple of questions here on IG if they're there. So if they are there, put some questions in the question box, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a good one. Okay. And okay.